Hello and welcome to Politics War Room with James Carville, and I'm Al Hunt. This week our guest is an expert on the rise of religious nationalism, author and journalist Katherine Stewart. Now remember, we love taking your questions, so write into politicswarroom@gmail.com or send a tweet to @Politicon for next week's show. We'll get to as many as we can, but don't forget to tell us where you're from. And please check out the link to our sponsor, The Washington Post, in our episode show notes. And we thank you for supporting our sponsors. It really helps make this podcast happen. Now, please tell your friends about us and remind them to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. James, we got to talk about the Trump trial, I guess. I tune on television every day to see what, in real time, what they're saying, and I read about it. I must say that the story the other day was the defense made gains when Stormy Daniels was on. The judge actually chastised the prosecutors for a while. I don't know how key Stormy Daniels is to the final outcome of this trial. They got her to admit she hates Trump. Well, I don't blame her. Why shouldn't she hate Trump? What he said about her. What's ignored in this, and maybe it doesn't matter legally, is that Trump denies this ever happened. Well, of course it happened. I mean, why the hell did he pay her $130,000 if it didn't happen? And but those lies just are glossed over. James, I'm not sure how it's playing out in the country. I'm not even sure if people are paying any attention to it. I must confess, I worry that if there's a hung jury, this trial is going to redound to Donald Trump's advantage, playing the victim card. I hope that's not the result, but I'm worried.
Well, I will confess I have very limited experience with juries. Okay, but what I think we're not getting, at least I don't get it, maybe somebody does, is that the prosecution has certain markers it has to hit. They have to prove intent.
Right.
They got to prove a number of things. And I wish we had legal analysts, not about the salacious stuff for the judge giving a jury instruction, because most jurors, I think 97.5% of jurors are very conscientious. Are they hitting their markers? When the prosecution goes at night, when they go back to their office, a hotel room, they said, okay, this is what we wanted to do today. Did we check this off? When the defense goes back, we're trying to institute a reasonable doubt. Did we hit that marker today? And where are they in this trial? It's like you're a skier and you go through different gates.
Right.
They have to go through different gates. But you can't tell, but a sophisticated prosecutor, a defense attorney, can say, look, this is what they've set out this morning to do. It's pretty evident. Did they get this done or not? And I think that's what we're lacking. Well, and it's all, well, there might be one hung juror, but that's not very common. It's kind of hard to hold out. And they got two lawyers on that jury. Presumably, they'll have a lot of influence on other jurors. That judge is going to give them instructions. And they're going to take those 97.5% of them, take those instructions very seriously. They said, okay, we elect a foreman. These are the elements to these different 34 counts. And I don't think we're getting that. I think we're getting how Trump growled at somebody and they looked at this.
Stormy had a bad day or whatever.
Stormy had a bad day. I don't think that's where they're going to be. I think the judge is going to say none of that matters. You're in a courtroom and this is what matters. And he's going to give them very specific instructions. By the way, there's no definition of beyond a reasonable doubt. To say, it means what you ever wanted to mean. It means beyond all doubt, no, but it has to be not some doubt. And they'll give them that. But I don't think we're being taken into what these prosecutors, when they go home at night, or these defense attorneys are saying, we accomplished this, we didn't accomplish this, this is a problem. And I think that jury, we're getting all this, maybe there's going to be one holdout, and maybe there's going to be this, and maybe there's going to be that. But my guess is they're going to go through these charges one by one, very specifically, and go through every element to see if there's a crime.
James, I think those are very good points. I think whatever happened or didn't happen with Miss Daniels the impact is exaggerated. I suspect, however, that when Michael Cohen testifies, that will be different because, among other things, he is the link to Trump's knowledge, Trump's intent. And obviously, the defense is going to try to savage him as a criminal, a liar, and everything else, all of which is true. You usually don't convict people with choir boys, but I think that will go to both the, if you will, the show part of the trial, but also what you're talking about, the real substance of whether they hit their markers or not.
I think, if I had to guess, I think what the prosecution is going to say is, we're not asking you to take Michael Cohen's word for anything. We understand that. But he walks you through. This is the check. This is the documentary evidence. This is what happened. This is what Hope Hicks said. This is what everybody said. I don't think this case is going to go to juries. There's a pivotal testimony in this. Is Michael Cohen. I don't think that's what it's going to be. I think they're going to use him as a kind of guide to walk through the evidence.
Uh-huh.
If they're depending on Michael Cohen's testimony to convict Trump, they're probably not going to. That's not going to work.
Couldn't agree more.
I don't think they
I think
are.
he's certainly
I don't think that's.
But
but they said, okay, Mr. Cohen, this is his check. And by the way, a couple other things. One other thing for sure, Michael Cohen testified in the civil case. The judge found him to be very credible. Now, the way that you're credible, and so if the defense starts to attack him, says, look, don't take my word for it. Let me show you this check I got from a copy of this check. Let me show you a copy of this text I got.
Mm-hmm.
It's not my word against Trump's word. It's my word and a documentary evidence. But if they're relying on Michael Cohen, well, the country's fucked.
No, I think you're right. And I think the prosecution is going to be smart enough to, in their examination of Michael Cohen, they're going to make quite clear, what a sleazy past he has. So this is not going to suddenly arise with cross.
The defense is going to do all of that.
Yeah.
They're going to say on such and such a date, you pled guilty to this. Is that correct? You got an extensive question by the judge that you admitted that you're a liar. Let me read the transcript. This is Judge so and so to you.
Right.
Yes. Okay. So we know all
right.
That. They're going to take him through this. They're not going. He's not going to testify because okay, yours, Mr. Blash. They're going to go through all of that, and he's going to say, as I told Mr. Calandro or whatever his name is, this and that. And yes, that's all true. I did.
Yes.
And I did plead guilty, and I spent time in jail, and it all came out of the same thing. So Cohen may turn out to be a better witness than we think. I don't know that. But what I wish our friend Andrew Weissman and some of these really talented and experienced attorneys would do to say, they're this far in proving what seems to us to where the elements are. Because that judge is going to say, you have to find the following things happen if you're going to reach a conviction. And if at any one of these stages you think there's a reasonable doubt that it's not true, then you're going to have to acquit. And that's going to be what is going to happen. And that judge is an experienced judge. Those instructions are the most important thing. And he was brutal on the defense lawyers for not objecting. He just said, I would have granted any number of objections to things that Stormy Daniels said today, but you didn't object. He publicly chastised the defense lawyers, which is pretty rare.
Yeah, he also, and let the prosecutors have it on some stuff. No, he is a highly respected judge, and I think that of course Trump came out and once again refers to the whole thing as a lie. But I don't pay any attention to what Trump's saying because you can write it ahead of time.
So this is something part of the conversation I want to get into with you. There are two things that we hear about Trump. Number one, he lies all the time.
Yep.
You can't believe anything he says. All right, we're conditioned to believe that for good reason. The other thing is that pay attention to what he says. Look at his Time magazine article. He's laying out to you what would second term is going to look like. It'd be totalitarian, it's law. Well, the voters, which fucking one am I supposed to believe? Is he a guy that lies about everything all the time? Or is he laying out his vision for a totalitarian, illegal, lawless second term? And what side are you on? And we've not done a good enough job of lighting on this. And it's sort of the public is just, well, they say everything. Fuck, I don't know what to believe or what not to believe. But of course, you hear it all the time. The economy was better. We can all tell people it's not. I don't know. But what am I supposed to believe?
Well,
he's a compulsive liar, or he's telling us that he's going to be an authoritarian, anti-constitutional president.
Well, I believe both. And the question is how you frame that. I mean, I think you raised a good question, and it's up to the Biden campaign and it's up to the press to frame that properly, because he has a proven track record of lying. The Washington Post, I think, caught him in over 30,000 lies.
30,000.
But and I don't have any doubt that what he says he wants to do, he wants to do. And so it's.
But this is the little boy that cried wolf. Okay, so we would say, tell people that listen to this show, he lies about everything, but on this you better believe him. Okay, that doesn't add up. It might add up to us who spend 6 hours a day reading this shit and going through everything and talking to people. It don't add up to a casual voter.
Well, it doesn't, and I think the Biden campaign has to focus on the latter. Believe what he says. This is what he plans to do, and this is why it will be so bad. Now, that's not to say I think they're going to have to do a lot of. They're not going to ignore the past, January 6th pictures and everything else, and not to try to relitigate January 6th, but to say things were awful under Trump. You don't remember that. But we're going to tell you how bad things were, and they have to do it skillfully. So far, they really with the exception of abortion, they haven't.
They haven't, and we don't have any guidance on what's the best negative against him. It's everything. He's a criminal. Right. He's a traitor. He gamed the system. Incompetent people, 11 his people were, indicted or something, whatever, this, that. And, General Mattis and all these people are against him. We got to light on a narrative here, which we don't have. And the only person that can really drive the narrative is not the commentariat. It's Biden and the Biden campaign. Right. And I don't, you and I have a mild dispute on this. I don't really see the polls getting any much better to see anything. And there was a whole spate of them. I just got a text from Brownstein, a whole spate of shitty state polls that came out today. And I don't know if you believe the state poll or the national poll, or registered voters, or likely voters, or a two-way or a four-way. But I see a race pretty stuck the way it was all year.
Well, I'll tell you what I believe, and I think it's clear if the election were held tomorrow, Trump would win. Now, he wouldn't win by much. Yeah. He wouldn't win all those states, but he'd win. And it's up to the Biden campaign to turn that around by talking about Trump in a skillful way, not Biden. But
I think that you would have to say, most people would say if it was held today, it would win. But I don't. What does all this mean? I don't know. And I'm getting a lot of false positives here. And, everybody goes to them. I mean, I look at the charts, changed very much.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sorry we stuck with what we got. I never thought it was a good idea. But we're going to war with the army we got. But goddamn, give us a strategy. Give us some marching orders or anything. What the fuck do we do?
James, before we end our chit-chat, just quickly on Israel and Gaza, and we should point out that we are taping this. We tape this 24 hours before it's broadcast.
Yeah, we tape it a little more than 24
So, yeah, and so, it's a very much of an evolving story. But I think the Israelis are, they're having a limited operation, they say, in Rafah, not a full scale invasion, but they went in and they killed a bunch of people, including 6 children. Um, Hamas is a bunch of untrustworthy terrorists and thugs. But Netanyahu is just simply not going to eliminate them. And for everyone he kills, there's probably another recruit somewhere. And I think he had every right to go in, but I think right now this is more about Netanyahu protecting his own interest, trying to make sure he pleases the right wing of that coalition. There's not an election for another 2 years, and he can hope that somehow his popularity will increase. It's still in lousy shape. It's improved a little bit, but still not very good from what happened on October 7th. Because for the simple reason he wants to stay out of jail.
Well, you're right. Hamas is not trustworthy. I mean, if you look at Bibi Netanyahu, is trustworthy the first,
No.
the 50th word that comes to your mind? I don't think so.
Right.
The thing that I don't know, and this is where I would like a Tom Friedman or a David Ignatius or Admiral Stavridis or one of these people that we look to, Enduria, okay, who I think is as good as all of them. Did Israel walk into a trap? So the Egyptians and Hamas said, we're going to have talks in Cairo. So Israel, and then they say, good, we offered you a deal, and you walked away from it. Was this all preset, predetermined? Did Netanyahu walk into a trap that the Egyptians and Hamas set for him? I don't know, but it sort of sounds fishy to me, and I think we need more coverage on this. And the other thing that you alluded to, I go, what does victory look like? You know?
Well, he set at terms that I think are unattainable. I think you can weaken Hamas. He has. I think you can create, hopefully, in the future, a 2-state solution in which Hamas would be marginalized. But the idea you're going to wipe out every one of them, it's just, not going to happen.
I don't know. What does winning look like?
Yeah.
All right. Or what does kind of winning look like? I don't know. I don't know. What's the have a happy ending, but what's an ending a satisfactory ending for Israel? I don't know.
Well,
I don't.
Yeah.
And they're out of control of the Rafah Gate. That's the access from southern Gaza's, which is huge. And everything comes through, humanitarian aid, refugees, you name it. There's a lot of shit going on at the Rafah Gate, I can tell you that. Not the place you want to be.
Yep. Well, let's hope that there is some, at least temporary, ceasefire and truce on this, because it's a catastrophic story in a human sense, and also every day Israel is getting hurt in world opinion. So,
and Biden's getting
clobbered.
This is the most stunning thing. So they had a pro-Palestinian protest, and they had counter-protesters. And the only thing they agreed on is together they were chanting, fuck Joe Biden.
Yeah.
Yet all of this is Joe Biden's fault. So they're protesting against his policies, but yet it's his fault. That's stunning. That's utterly stunning that he's being blamed for something that is protesting against him. It's breathtaking. And Trump, get me started on all his anti-Semitic shit that he does, and he has no fucking idea. But he's being helped by this, and Biden's being hurt by it. And
the longer it goes on, the more Trump will capitalize on it, both over there and here.
It looks disorder. But
Well,
Biden's being hurt by protests against his own fucking policy.
Okay, next week we'll have something more uplifting to talk about, I hope.
I doubt it. Go ahead. Albert, when I first got in national politics, it was really in 1982 in Virginia. And of course, I was in Richmond. The Post came every day. I always read the Washington Post first. until this day, I still read the Washington Post before I read NOLA.com. And it's just a habit I've developed over the years. They infuriate me from time to time, but everybody infuriates everybody from time to time. I don't know, but I've been reading them first for 42 years, and my last day on earth, the first thing I'm gonna read is the Washington Post. I promise you.
It's just a really incredible newspaper. When life moves fast, and knowing what's going on in the world and in your industry is more important than ever. So you have to get the latest and stay informed. And the way to do that is subscribe to the Washington Post. The speed of news, it never stops. This one thing is much different than it was when I began reading the Post. It's much faster and it's much 24/7. And quality reporting remains critical.
Yep.
That's why the Post is one of our must-reads for understanding how current events impact us, our work, and our families. This podcast is sponsored by the Washington Post, where you can go deeper into the news that matters most to you. Their journalists bring you the facts and clarity about Capitol Hill, the economy, climate change, foreign policy, and everything else you care about. Whether it's breaking news updates, the most comprehensive political and international coverage, thought-provoking opinions, or even new dinner recipes, a Washington Post subscription has something for every reader. Every day, there's stories that will explain the world, teach you something new, and inspire you. James, this is the hardest question to answer. Who are your favorite writers at the Post?
I love V.J. Dion. I just do. The guy's been around forever. But some of these people I don't know personally. I think Carol Leoning is one of the best. Whatever she says, I trust it implicitly. I think she's just a terrific reporter. On a sports page, what's his name? Barry Servula. I can't pronounce his name, but I think he's Mark Maskey is the Reds, the Commanders beat writer. But I kind of view him as a little bit like, I don't want to go totally Washington here, but it's kind of 1/3 my hometown newspaper. I spent a lot of time living in Washington. I didn't leave because I hated Washington. I left because I just wanted to go home. But I still go back a lot, and I still read the Post for 42 years. The first thing I read is the Washington Post, and I don't think I'm going to change that.
Well, we could add a lot of names. I would certainly second Carol Leoning. God, is she good. And I think their political team with the great Dan Baltz, Josh Dawsey, Karen Tumblety writing for the editorial page now. They're just terrific. Max Boot is a really fascinating editorial page writer who I first knew him when he was at the Wall Street Journal. He was kind of a right-winger. Trump has cured him of some of that. And on the sports page today, they brought back Tom Boswell.
Oh, God, the best ever.
The best baseball writer of all times. I think kind of a super optimist about the Washington Nationals, but I'm going to embrace that. They have a sleekly designed app that makes it easy to stay up to date on the latest news, save stories to your reading list, and follow your favorite authors. We've given you a list to choose from, a big one. You can even listen to their articles when you're on the go. You name it, they cover it. Climate, culture, crossroads, cooking. That's just the letter C. Recently, we've been loving their Inspired Life section that documents human moments and acts of kindness. We're convinced it's the perfect antidote to dooming and scrolling. I didn't mention their healthcare coverage. Laurie McGinley and others are terrific there. But remember, a Washington Post subscription makes it easy to access quality, trustworthy journalism, and it's affordable too. Go to WashingtonPost.com/warroom to subscribe for just 50 cents a week for your first year. That's 80% better than their typical offer. So this is truly a steal. Once again, that's WashingtonPost.com/warroom to subscribe for just 50 cents a week. Find a better deal for 50 cents a week for your first year. You can also find the link to great journalism in our show notes.
Yeah, I was spending more than 50 cents a week in 1982, so it's a good deal. It's a great newspaper.
James, our guest is Katherine Stewart, an author of a number of books, including Power Worshippers, and a foremost expert on Christian nationalism. Katherine, first, thanks for being with us. James and I were both raised as Christians. The great civil rights movement was centered on the church, the Reverend Martin Luther King. Nationalism isn't necessarily bad, but explain why you believe that Christian nationalism in America today is such a danger, such a threat.
Sure. First of all, let's talk about what Christian nationalism is and what it's not. Christian nationalism is not Christianity. It's not a religion. It's an anti-democratic ideology that exploits religion. Really, this is about politics. It's about power. It's a movement that wants a government-endorsed conservative Christianity. It's kind of an exclusionary idea of nationalism, who gets to properly belong in the country and who doesn't. And they say that our laws should be based on the Bible as they interpret the Bible. And the movement, frankly, disparages the way that a lot of Christians, I'll say many, if not most American Christians, understand faith, which has much more to do with loving our neighbors rather than using religion to dominate other people and impose one religion on everyone else.
Yeah. It is, as you say, a very powerful political movement. Tell us how entrenched they are and where's their money coming from?
Well, the important thing to understand about Christian nationalism, it's not just a mindset, it's also a machine. And the machine consists of a very densely interconnected network of organizational leaders. It's what we used to call the Christian right. They've invested for over 50 decades in a number of different organizations that we can group into different categories, like right-wing policy groups and think tanks, legal advocacy groups, a vast messaging sphere, even data initiatives, much of which functions as a giant voter turnout machine in election cycles. So we really can't understand what's happening today in the Republican Party without understanding this movement and how it's really it's really destroying the old Republican Party. The movement is not remotely conservative. Its ideas are frankly quite radical and anti-democratic. It seems like the guardrails of the old Republican Party have fallen away, and it's this movement's leadership that's calling the shots.
Because they are the dominant force in the Republican Party today, more than big business, more than...
That's absolutely true. And you asked where the money is coming from. The movement is really awash in, there's a tremendous amount of money that flows through the system. I discussed a number of the big funders in the Power Worshippers, and then there are others. The interesting thing about the funders is many of them are not particularly motivated by the culture wars. They see those as the issues to get the little people involved. Right? How do you get, people to vote a certain way? You get them engaged in these identitarian, and identity politics, abortion, same-sex marriage, some of the trans issues, et cetera. They use these issues almost like shiny baubles to get the rank and file to vote a certain way. But the funders are more, I would say many of them more motivated by sort of far-right economic ideology. They want low taxes for the rich. They want minimal regulation of businesses, minimal environmental regulations. You think of a funder like Barry Seid, who is a Jewish Chicago billionaire, who donated $1.6 billion. I think it's the largest political donation to form something called the Marble Freedom Trust. And he put a very powerful leader in the sort of legal sphere, a guy named Leonard Leo, in charge of this. Doesn't seem particularly animated by, the idea that, we need to reclaim America for Christianity. It's much more about sort of getting a sort of economic ideology in place. But how do you do that with the rank and file? You do it by litigating the culture wars.
Yeah, and I'm going to turn it over to James. But I watched the documentary that you did, God and Country. They talk a lot about Jesus. And Donald Trump really personifies the anti-Jesus. I mean, he really does. But these Christian nationalists they rationalize a different Jesus than I learned about and that I thought was such a great figure, and they love Donald Trump.
They absolutely love Donald Trump because for a couple of reasons. The first is that he gave them everything they wanted and more: unprecedented political access, policies that privileged certain viewpoints over others, access to public money, judges that they wanted. It was really kind of a deal in the run-up to 2016. He met with over 1,000 evangelical pastors in New York City. He said, I'm going to appoint all these judges to the courts from this list, and all these judges are pro-life, and I'm going to form an evangelical advisory council and make Mike Pence my VP. And so he was saying, look, I'll do for you if you turn out your votes for me. And he did. But there's more to it than that. Donald Trump represents the kind of lawlessness of the authoritarian, the lawlessness of a strongman. And in doing so, he kind of appeals to different sort of psychological aspects of this movement. The mindset of Christian nationalism relies on the sense of catastrophism. America is going to hell in a handbasket thanks to liberal secular elites. And so no action, no matter how dramatic, is justified in order to save the country from apocalypse. And so there's this sort of justification for a strongman who's going to come in and fix it all, and he's going to break the rules, and that's okay because the rules are broken. And so Donald Trump kind of appeals to this movement in that way. They find ways to justify their support for a thrice married philanderer, right? They say, he's a King Cyrus or a King David, an imperfect ruler that God chose to enact his will. Well, here's the thing about, kings like Cyrus and David. They're not kings of democracies. There's a lot of talk within that movement about kingship and how we really need a kind of the hard hand of a leader who's going to break the rules. And Donald Trump fits the bill.
James.
I've been fascinated by this for a long time. I became friendly with Francis Schaeffer's son. Tell us about a couple of people that were highly influential that most of our people never heard of. Let's start with R.J. Rushdoony. Who was R.J. Rushdoony, and what's his influence, and where does he fit into this scheme?
R.J. Rushdoony is a mid-century theologian who was a leader of the Christian Reformed movement. He wrote dozens of books. He was very prolific, and he found, he was not a shallow thinker, actually, but he came up with this idea, he justified the idea that our laws should be based on the Bible, hierarchies ordained by God, men over women always. He appeared to support segregation. I've got about a dozen of his books in my bookshelf behind me. It's hard to kind of encapsulate his thinking very quickly, but it was basically this idea of dominion, that Christians of a certain type, not the way, frankly, most Americans understand Christianity, not social gospel Christianity, but a certain type of very reactionary Christianity should dominate and should be infused into our laws. And a lot of thinkers of some of the key thinkers of Christian nationalism today actually echo a lot of his ideas and even some of his language, such as his hatred for public education, this idea of hierarchies as ordained by God, and the idea that there's no such thing as a separation of church and state.
I gather in that hierarchy, I'm ahead of you because I'm a male and you're a female.
I don't know. You're wearing a pink sweatshirt, so I'm not sure about that.
I believe the most widely followed historian is not Heather Cox Richardson or Sean Wilentz or Eric Forner. I think the most followed historian or self-described historian is a man named David Barton. Well, let's talk about his expertise in the academy and his deep knowledge and understanding American history and constitutionalism and whatever. Tell us about David Barton, the popular historian.
Well, thanks for bringing up David Barton. James, I describe him in my book as the Where's Waldo of the Christian nationalist movement. I don't know if you guys have children or grandkids.
Oh, yeah, we do that all over the country.
Oh, you know Where's Waldo. You know, he's everywhere.
I know Flat Stanley, too.
So, you say, what's his experience inside the academy? I would say his experience is outside the academy. He's been a kind of key myth maker of the Christian nationalist movement. Listen, his ideas are so off with most historians that his book was actually rejected and withdrawn by his publishing house, Thomas Nelson Publishing House, which is a Christian publishing house. They looked at one of his books and they said, we're going to withdraw it because it's lacking in matters of fact. There have been times when David Barton has been shown to have made up quotes from the founders that didn't actually exist. I mean, he just comes up with a kind of alternate version of American history that the movement leaders need in order to claim that the country was founded as an ultra-conservative Christian nation. Our founders were all Bible thumpers, which anyone who's read them knows that they weren't. But his ideas are too valuable to the movement to discard just because they're not true. Because the idea of infusing a reactionary interpretation of the Bible into our laws really relies on some deep constitutional distortions.
So, there's never going to be, if you told Americans what Christian nationalism is, it could never get above 1/3 support. I don't know what the number is, but it would be substantially under 50. But they're supplying money, troops, everything, and this is my view, and please correct me if I'm wrong, let's say Trump gets elected, which right now might even happen, is they will say, look, you go cut tax rates and steal everything you want, go after all your political enemies. We're going to handle the Justice Department and the Education Department and all of this stuff that you're not interested in. Do you see a kind of a grand bargain like that? And then we start to...
It's very interesting. Have you read, I'm sure you've seen Project 2025. It's a 900-page document put together by the Heritage Foundation, involves a lot. And it involves, a lot of really concerning steps. Like, they want to fire as many as 40 to 50,000 public civil servants who are most of them just keeping their heads down, doing their job and relying on their professional expertise, and replace them with Trump loyalists. If that's not the definition of authoritarianism, I don't know what is. And the idea of going after political enemies, yes, he's promised to do that. But I think, on the day-to-day level, we'll see some pretty significant changes through our laws, through Supreme Court decisions and perhaps some lower court decisions as well. People are very concerned about the overturning of Roe versus Wade, but this movement is really focused on ending all abortions, which they define as from the moment of conception, which would outlaw many forms of very popular and effective birth control, such as birth control pills and IUDs. So this kind of thing is going to affect families. It's going to interfere with our most private decisions. A lot of people think, oh, well, I'm not really going to be affected by this. Maybe I'll get some tax cuts or whatever. But this is frankly, would involve a profound reordering of our society.
Albert and I had one more question before we go.
Yeah, James got into the historians. Let me get into a gunslinger who I've known for almost 40 years, Ralph Reed. He survived scandal, distortions, everything else, and yet he still is a pretty important political operative, isn't he?
Absolutely. I think he's one of the most seasoned and astute strategists of this movement. Every year, he runs a gathering called the Road to Majority Conference. I try to attend every year. because they're not hiding. It's like, we're not listening, right? You've got these activists, key activists and leaders and their allied politicians. They get up there every year and they tell us what they're going to do. And then they do it. And then they tell us that they did it. And one thing that Ralph Reed has been so effective at doing is broadening the reach of this movement. He has been very focused on targeting, different communities, but especially Latino voters of faith by drawing a lot of Latino pastors into networks and working with them. One of the key parts of the sort of organizational infrastructure are these pastor networks. Some of them have tens of thousands of affiliated pastors. Movement leaders know if you can get the pastors, you can get a lot of their congregations. They're the most trusted sources of information often and trusted people within their communities. So they draw these pastors into networks. They give them very sophisticated tools for explaining how to vote what the biblical values should be, which always reduced to things like abortion and same-sex marriage and things like that. And then they give them very detailed instructions and tools for drawing out their congregations and getting them to vote. And in a country, listen, if 40 to 50% of people don't bother to vote, and an additional number of people have their votes kind of downgraded through voter suppression, gerrymandering, whatever, you don't need a majority to win elections. All you need is a disproportionately motivated minority. And this movement delivers.
Yeah, they also were involved, some of them were involved with January 6th and have a relationship with some right-wing thugs like the Proud Boys.
This is true. But, even those that do not have association with the Proud Boys, many of them started repeating election lies as soon as the election was decided. I went to a gathering in Virginia that was part of a pastoral network called Faith Wins. There were all these pastors in this church, and they had speakers, including David Barton's son. He was one of them. And they were talking about how you pastors, you need to get your people out to vote. And they had with them an elections integrity specialist named Hogan Gidley. He used to be a member of the Trump administration.
From Ole Miss. He's a real idiot.
Oh, you know him.
Yeah,
so
he
was Santorum's press secretary.
He is a first-class fool.
Well, he's also a liar because he was out there spreading election lies, even about like the remember that cyber ninja investigation in Arizona? They found nothing. Well, he's like, oh, you saw what they found in Arizona. And this is after they found nothing. But pastors not necessarily glued to the news like you or I, and maybe they didn't get the memo that there was no problem over there. But he was out there spreading lies about the election.
Katherine, one more, and then James can close this out. But they many of the Christian nationalists voice great support for Israel, but at the same time there is a pretty strong strain of anti-Semitism among some of their leaders. Is that right? And how do you address that contradiction?
I think it varies within different parts of the movement. I think that there is a sector that's very sort of pro-Zionist. There's a very strong kind of Christian Zionist movement that sees Israel as really critical to their end-time theology. But I think that there's sort of diverse views on Jews generally and Israel specifically within the movement.
Mm-hmm. James.
So I have a theory, and I was great. My theory is if you had 100 people in a room, and one of them was Hogan Gidley, and you took an average American and said, which one of these people is Hogan Gidley? 99% say, that's that guy. So be sure we put a picture of him, because he looks just like Hogan Gidley is supposed to look. I have no idea, but I've never seen a name match a person.
Hogan Gidley.
So before I go, just one observation. I am told, I've read, I think, that the Christian nationalist view of the First Amendment only applies to Christians. So a Presbyterian has a view, or Methodist has a view. I'm not sure if Catholics, of which I am a cradle Catholic, are part of it. But Jews are not part of the First Amendment does not apply to them. It doesn't apply to Muslims. It doesn't apply to atheists. It's only, is that a correct interpretation of their doctrine, that the First Amendment is reserved for Christianity?
You know, they sometimes use the term Judeo-Christian in order to add the appearance of diversity to their movement, and also because they often, like the pastors often quote from the Old Testament for a variety of reasons. But, especially when it comes to some of those culture war issues, like, I don't know, man laying with man, but of course they've forgotten the part about, I don't know, mixed materials and cloth. I mean,
Right.
people interpret the Bible in many different ways. But, they claim that they have claimed in the past that they just want a seat at the table in the noisy form of American democracy. They just want their free speech rights like anybody else. But when you look at what they do, they don't want to see at the table. They want to own the table, right? They really want their views to dominate. They're really after a kind of dominion, and some of them are very explicit about that. They say some sector of the movement agrees with this idea that Christians of a certain variety, not like the sort of woke churches, as they call them, or woke Christians, should dominate all aspects of government and society, including media. They're very specific about it. They identify molders or mountains of culture, which they include as media, education, business, things like that.
So Ken, if I talk to you, I talk to Rob Ryan, excuse me, first name guy, dropping names like crazy. And other people say, look, pay attention to what these people say. It's Project 25. They're highly organized. They're highly funded. They are a really true threat. All right. Then I would talk to people like the Daniel Dale, the fact checker at CNN now. I talk to people that follow Trump. I don't know if Maggie would say this. People say, the guy's incapable of telling the truth. You can't believe anything that he says. He's been documented lying 30,000 times. I think we have a contradictory message here. That you better believe him, but he's a world-class liar. And I think that's confusing to people at some level. And I think that people who are very important in this space, and you clearly being one of them, I think that, frankly, this show has some influence in that space, and other people do. We got to settle on a narrative here. Do you believe him or not believe him? Is he a tool to these people? Or what do we tell you? Because we're telling you don't believe anything he says, but believe this he says. You understand where to a casual voter who spends 4 minutes a week thinking about politics is rather confusing.
Well, we have to pay attention to what he does and what he has done. Look at the court picks. Look at the fact that he put all these folks on the Supreme Court that were bound to make the decisions that they made. He put these sort of, I would say, let's call them, conservatives or ultra conservatives on the Supreme Court, which are now helping him, delaying decisions so that, and also making decisions that are going to impact the way Americans live their lives. And we have to look at who he put in charge of different divisions of government. We put Betsy DeVos in charge of Department of Education. This is a woman who wants to destroy public education and sees her ed choice activism as a way of advancing God's kingdom. She and her husband have actually said that. And are very hostile to public education. We can look at who he put in charge of the Interior, who he put in charge of Health and Human Services. Exactly. So I think we have to look at what he has done in the past and also understand very well that he cannot win without the support of this movement. And if they are standing behind him, he will give them what they want.
Well, I can't tell you how delighted, how much I follow you. It's one of these things I get these, maybe I'm overreacting. I don't think I'm overreacting on this. I think these people are really goddamn crazy. They're very dangerous, and they're much closer to power than we want to admit. I mean, I think you're doing a great job of sounding the klaxon here, I don't know, the alarm or something like that. But I think people like us, they've got to help you pick this up and tell people what's going on. I don't think people really know or understand this. It's just why you're a Christian. I know plenty of people that are Christian, as nationalists, or okay, what's wrong? We salute the flag. We go to the ball game. They fly the F-22s over, and they bring out some quadriplegic poor soldier on second base, and we all cheer it, and we feel like we're great patriots. And people like you have got to is starting to ring this bell, and my hat's off to you. Congratulations. But this shit is so crazy and so dangerous, and that's the hard thing to digest, that something can be this crazy and this dangerous.
Well, I want to second everything that James just said, Catherine, and tell all of our listeners out there that if you haven't read The Power Who Worships Her, you have to get it right now. And also look at God and Country, because if you think this is just, a kind of a fringe element, you're wrong. It's not, and no one has documented that better than you, Katherine Stewart. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
We do, and thank you for joining us from London, and keep it up. And I'm sure we'll have to. I hope we don't have to have you back on between now and Election Day, but I fear we might. And I hope you take that as a compliment, not an insult.
Absolutely.
We'll try to do it at a better time next time, Catherine, though, I promise for you.
And anytime.
Hey, now for the outrage of the week. James, you may remember one time when President Trump opened a cabinet meeting to the cameras, and he called on each member to say what a fabulous leader he was. They all obliged, except Defense Chief Jim Mattis, who praised American troops. Well, his vice presidential possibilities, after they had a Mar-a-Lago tryout last weekend, they got the message. On Meet the Press, South Carolina Senator Tim Scott was asked 6 times by Kristen Welker whether he would support the outcome of the 2024 election. 6 times he refused to answer. On Face the Nation, South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem refused to answer Margaret Brennan's simple question, why she wrote in her new book about facing down North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un when she actually never met him. She blamed that mistake on a ghostwriter, although she herself read the audio version of the book. And why she bragged about shooting her puppy and goat she deemed dangerous? Why? Well, she shifted the subject to the biting habits of President Biden's German Shepherd. Brennan and Welker did a good job asking relevant questions and pressing for answer. But if you want to stay in Trump's good graces, you don't level, you don't give honest answers, you just avoid. Scott and Noem, no doubt, didn't mind that to some of us they made fools of themselves. All that mattered was pleasing the dear leader.
Yeah, the interesting thing about this, she put this, obviously knew, she read the book, she did the whole thing. She actually thought this was going to help her. All right? Yeah. I'd love to just go into her mind. And, Corey Lewandowski is I'm not repeating gossip about it. She and Corey Lewandowski were very friendly. For all I know, they're still very friendly. And she's just one of these people that come along and they decide that they like being players in national politics, and then they make utter fools of themselves. And that's what this woman is, a giant, colossal fool. So my outrage, so Aileen Cannon, the incompetent judge in Fort Pierce, attended, we find out, a judicial conference in Yellowstone National Park put on by Leonard Leo, George Mason Law School. Everything was paid for, $1,000 a night, first-class transportation, steaks. And in defense of her, why shouldn't she? Look at what Clarence Thomas does. Look at what Sam Alito does. Look at what Neil Gorsuch did. Look at John Roberts' wife, the most undercovered scandal. And why does a third grader have to do what the teacher says when or a district court judge care about ethics when the Supreme Court could give less a shit about ethics? And let me be very specific here. The three Democrats on the Supreme Court, in my opinion, are collaborationists. And I agree with Linda Greenhouse. Who gives a shit if you eat together? And they keep putting this crap out that they have meatloaf on Friday night, or they say, well, we're just trying to come to the right conclusion. I don't have any. I know Kagan was a dean at a Harvard Law School, and Ketanji Brown is the most qualified person, and Sotomayor is the first. I think these people are weak. I think that they're like that Columbia student. If Roberts lets them on the meal ticket, they don't care. They get their space. They get their law clerks, and they say, "Well, I dissent." Well, what are you playing along with this shit? You're collaborators. You're being silent among massive fraud and corruption in the federal judiciary. I dissent when they're just making up law left and right. And it's time for these three women to, like Linda Greenhouse says, I don't give a shit if you eat meals together. What does that mean? And I think we just have a corrupt Supreme Court, which breeds a corrupt federal judiciary. And it's a big freaking problem in this country.
Well, and it's only going to get worse if Donald Trump is elected in November.
And then Leonard Leo got a $1.6 billion, buy and sell them like a sack of potatoes.
Yeah.
Stare decisis. What the shit are they talking about? Give a shit. And you know, we're going to be eating meatloaf on Friday night. You know who's going to be in the meatloaf? You're going to be in the meatloaf.
James, our just superb questions from our listeners. Some of them, as I requested last week, if we didn't get to you, please send them back in, and we're going to get to them this week. Steve in Cambridge, Ohio, wants to ask, after Trump is defeated, keep your fingers crossed and everything else, Steve, how can we strengthen our balance of power? We know Trump isn't going to be the last.
Well, I don't know. I mean, you know, right now we got to defeat Trump, and I got to tell you, it's troubling. The two polls, Muhlenberg College, and done by Fabrizio and Anzalone in Pennsylvania, that both show the same thing. We're not on track to win this election right now, and somebody's got to tell the people this is going very poorly, and we need to get some direction here. And I'm sorry, I'm a bedwetter, and I think it's time to hit panic buttons. I just do. And the consequences of this are going to be utterly draconian. And I'm getting scared. I'm getting nervous. I don't like what I'm seeing. And I think we got too much goddamn happy talk about the State of the Union and a comeback. I don't see this. I don't see a unified theory of why we should keep Trump out of there. It's a very troubling time in American presidential politics. Extremely troubling.
Yeah. Billy in Cottonwood Heights, Utah. Cottonwood Heights, Utah. I'd like to visit that. By the way, Utah has maybe the most interesting Republican governor in the country, Spencer Cox, who is he's a conservative, but he's a man with some humor, and he's trying to, figure out a way to at least mitigate the nastiness. I'm a big Spencer Cox fan. Anyway, Billy asked, how do well-intentioned leaders, journalists, and even citizens of this country combat the reality that most of us base our politics on opinions and disinformation rather than facts? Is this the new world we all have to live in? I mean, Billy, yeah, I think some of that's true. Daniel Patrick Moynihan used to say, we're all entitled to our opinions, but not our facts. These days, if you look at cable news, if you're a liberal, you look at MSNBC. If you're conservative, you look at Fox. I think there are a number of good news venues, but people who disagree with me wouldn't agree with that. And I just think that social media has compounded the problem. And, it's just you raise a good point, Billy, and I don't have a good answer.
Well, I suspect I listen to, watch, or read more conservative media than most people. I watch Fox a pretty good bit. I listen to 125 Patriot on the satellite radio a lot. I read Town Hall, and it's so insane, but it has appeal. And boy, I tell you, they drive a narrative, and it's all utterly insane. There's no fact checking, there's no anything, but they got 45% of the country eating out of their hand, and it's a scary time in American politics. I have to say that. It's very
No,
scary.
it is. Paul in San Antonio, Texas, ask if these college protests at Ivy and elite colleges will make people take a second look at the many excellent state universities in their state. James, what do you
Well,
say?
there was a study that came out, and it was pretty conclusive. May not like, but if you go to an Ivy League school, it's actually kind of worth it. But if you go to an expensive private school, you go to a state school, Ohio State or something like that, you actually do better going to the state school. And let me tell you, you can get superb education at state schools. I can't tell you this is that the University of North Carolina is as good as Duke. I have no idea. I can't tell you that the University of Texas is as good as Rice. I suspect it might be. But you have the option. And one of the unfortunate things that's happened is we're cutting back funding for these state schools and making them more expensive. But we should be like increasing access to them. But I mean, some of these schools, they're hard like Michigan or Berkeley or, Texas or UW or these schools are more like Ivies than they are like what do you think of as normal MU. So yeah, there's a lot of great state universities, but they're not getting the funding that they need at all, and that's where we're going to be competitive.
And you've seen the price that's paid in places like Berkeley. And I fear North Carolina is going that route too right now, because Chapel Hill is such a great university.
Correct.
Gary in Falls Church, Virginia, says the polls are based on the popular vote. Shouldn't the polls be based on how the Electoral College will vote? Gary, you can find that out easily. There are polls in all the key states all the time, and you can just look at it, and it's not hard to add up. Michigan has 15 electoral votes. Georgia has 16, and so forth. And so I don't, we may pay a little bit too much attention to national polls, but usually the state polls, they don't follow the national polls, but they're in line with the national polls.
There's a lot of anti-polling stuff. Oh, you can't trust them. They don't do this. They don't do what they do. Likely voters. Well, I found the polls to be pretty instructive and pretty accurate in modern American politics. I mean, they can't get it down to plus or minus 1%. But I don't find them, they were off in 16 because it was late break. They didn't catch enough. They were more, but they've adjusted. When they make a mistake, the whole industry does everything it can to try to atone and fix the mistake. But I'm not one of these people that say don't believe the polls. You understand what a poll can deliver, but they're pretty all in sync. All right.
Yeah. They just and even the 60, there were a few bad polls in 16, but they weren't as off as commonly supposed. I was at Bloomberg then. We had Ann Selzer. Her final poll had Hillary winning the national vote by, I think, if you wanted to go to percentages, to 2.8%. She won by 2.2%. I'm not sure those figures. I mean, that wasn't wrong. There were a couple bad ones, but most of them were pretty close, James, even back then.
It did not. But I look at the averages, and I'm discouraged to say this, and I squint my eyes, and I don't see a lot of changes going on. Even the ABC poll, which, you had Biden up in a two-way, he was actually down in the four-way. I don't know what it means. And his approval was at all-time low. And what bothers me is when you look underneath, it's worse than what you see on top.
Rick in Albuquerque, New Mexico, says, does Trump actually have any campaign theme other than grievance this time around? Well, that's certainly central, but there are a lot of other themes, ending the rule of law as we know it, gutting the civil service, Again, there were several mentions in this program of the Heritage 900-page report in 2025. Go read that, Rick. But grievances, his revenge tour, as he puts it, is going to be very important if he's elected and tragic.
I am told that his campaign is that underneath, not him, he's crazier than ever, is actually a lot better than it was in 2020 or 2016. That their fundraising operation, their grievance operation, their stuff is actually not as bad as you would hope it would be. I don't know if that's true, but that's something that knowledgeable people tell me. And I don't think that we can count on Trump's campaign being bad. I think that's a bad strategy. I mean, I hope it is. But,
no, I don't, and I don't think that was something to count on in the past. And I have trouble feeling good about anybody who's trying to elect Donald Trump president. Right. But this is James. You're going to like this. This is from last week, and I held it on purpose. You ready?
I'm ready.
Kathy in McKinney, Texas.
Okay.
So hometown of Kate Lehrer. Right. She says she found an old cookbook at an antique store in Covington, Louisiana, written by your mother. James, her question is, what's your favorite recipe from your mom's cookbook?
Sensation salad. And I make it for my family every holiday, and they'll kill me if I don't. And you got to get the recipe, and it's very cheesy and lemony and oily. I don't know. It just goes so well with Louisiana food. I can't tell you. But sensation salad is my all-time recipe. And I'll tell you something that's interesting about that. That's a self-published cookbook. And I think the last time I asked, they've sold 35,000 copies. One of the things I know about publishing, there's not a lot of books that sell 35,000 copies. You hear about, if you're John Grisham or Bob Woodward or, Heather Cox Richardson, you sell a gazillion books, Oprah Winfrey. But most books would be very happy and particularly a self-published book. And that my mother used to go to banks and big employers and insurance companies and say, look, you're just going to order 200 of these and we're going to take care of all your holiday gifts. And then she'd go in like Barnes and Noble and she'd start putting up a display. And the people come back, Ms. Carville, this is great. I love your book, but corporate doesn't allow us to do independent book displays. She says, honey, they'll never know. Just put it up, right? And so you would go in there, she'd put up her own display in these chain bookstores. Oh, honey, those people will never know in New York. Don't worry about it. It was books of me, and I think they were in the Southern thing. It was in Birmingham. And she was such a salesman. She just set up her own display. And then tell her to take it down. She said, oh, no, I'm not going to do that. You just don't worry about it, darling. And you're going to get to keep 20%. I should cut a deal with the bookstore manager. And a guy would say, oh, okay, Miss Carville, I guess so. What the hell? No one will ever find out.
Well, Kathy in McKinney, Texas, we thank you for that question. That's a great way to end this show on a very upbeat note.
It sure was.
Hey, thanks for listening to Politics War Room with James Carville, and I'm Al Hunt. Don't forget to send your questions for us by email to politicswarroom@gmail.com or tweet them for next week's show @Politicon. Now, following this episode, we'd really appreciate it if you check out the link to our sponsor, The Washington Post, in our episode show notes. We thank you for supporting them because when you do, you help make this podcast happen. Now, to keep up with us, subscribe to Politics War Room on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. You can also find other shows you might enjoy on the Politicon YouTube channel or when you search Politicon on your favorite podcast sites. And remember, please rate the show with a 5-star review. We'll be back next week with another show as we continue our War Room planning.